Here comes the beat. Get ready. Can you hear that? Do you hear the music?
Yeah, I hear it.
Okay. All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to The Holler. Justin here. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We also have all of these other hollers hollering all across Tennessee. Thanks to your support. Really do appreciate it. Your small dollar monthly donations are what keep us going. So thank you for that. Really appreciate all the support you've given us these past 4 years and counting. Also, a big shout out to Elisa Parker. If you're buying or selling a home in Middle Tennessee, do it through her. She's supportive of us. And if you need a lawyer, Abby Rubenfeld. If you need a lawyer, Jason, if you're ever in Tennessee and you need a lawyer, Abby Rubenfeld is your girl. She's awesome, and she's very supportive of us. So today we want to talk about something that it's focused on Florida, but it has relevance to Tennessee. You know, as anybody who's followed the Holler for any amount of time knows, you know, we go through a lot of what the rest of the country goes through here. But Texas and Florida tend to get a lot of the focus, but we're kind of the tip of the spear with a lot of these ugly bills, a lot of these, you know, very right-wing extremist ideologies. We have the strictest abortion ban in the country here in Tennessee. We've passed multiple bills focused on whitewashing history. We had an anti-CRT bill here. We had a quote-unquote divisive concepts bill here. And now that Governor Lee has been sworn in for a second term, I'm sure we'll see more of it. But one of the articles that caught my eye was by our guest here today, Dr. Jason Nichols, who wrote in Newsweek that Ron Desantis is banning Black studies in schools and it's disgraceful. So I wanted Jason or Dr. Nichols. What am I calling you today?
You can call me Jason.
All right. What I wanted Jason to talk to us about today is, you know, what's in that bill and, you know, why it's so rough, you know, why it takes things to another level. He wrote about it really well, and I thought he had some great perspective on it. So, Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I'm a fan of your work, and anytime I can support.
Appreciate that very much, man. Really means a lot. We can see your comments, so if you're commenting along and you have anything to say, let us know. So I guess I would first ask, what motivated you to write that article in Newsweek?
Well, obviously, on a personal level, African-American studies has been a serious part of my life, even before I knew it was African-American studies. You know, understanding the conditions that I saw my friends and family living under, understanding history and culture and sociology and anthropology of Black people in America has always been something that I've been interested in. And to see that, you know, having gone through the education system, I was blessed to have parents that came out of the civil rights and Black Power era. So they had books lying around, and they would give me the books and be like, you need to read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you know, when I was 13, or you need to read, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois. To see that there are students out there that want that opportunity to understand, you know, the conditions of African Americans, and by extension, the conditions of America itself, that being taken from them was really frustrating for me. And so I felt like it needed to be called out. We needed to stand up. And I think education is so important, and critical thinking is so important. And what we're seeing right now with book banning across the country, what we're seeing with trying to ban certain words and not giving students more opportunities to learn critical thinking. We just want them to learn, you know, 1 + 1 = 2 and learn very basic education concepts. and a twisted form of history that we've seen taught for generations and generations, I think is really troubling. I think it harkens back to an era when we look at what we did to Native Americans. Obviously, I'm not putting it on that scale, but trying to miseducate them out of understanding their own cultures. Same thing that was done in Europe to children in Germany, trying to give them this quote unquote patriotic education without giving them the full context. And I think when you start lying to children essentially that way, you're not doing good for the future. You're not making them better citizens. You're not making them better critical thinkers. And in African American studies, we are never, I'll tell you, it's a bad teacher if they tell you what to think. That's the first lecture I do. I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm going to give you information and let you come to your own conclusions. And that's what critical thinking is all about. Because then it might as well be, a math class or a grammar class. That's not what we're doing. We want you to come to your own conclusions.
Right. And, I have a 6-year-old daughter. We started talking to her about the truth about our history pretty early on, and she can handle it. Kids can handle it. They're stronger than we think, and we try to talk to her about these difficult topics all the time. But just to get specific about what DeSantis is doing with this law, our friend Gapper X, who joins us a lot, he says he's claiming he's doing this because CRT is in the course. What they said here was that it's inexplicably contrary to Florida law and quote unquote significantly lacks educational value. So, it's not even the CRT part of this necessarily. It's to include a quote like that is a real slap in the face. To say that African American studies lacks educational value, that's kind of taking things to a whole other level, isn't it?
Absolutely. And first of all, no high school AP course is going to have CRT in it. So let me just make that clear. If it does teach CRT, it'll be the very extreme basics. And I think we should teach all different kinds of concepts to young people. I think you're disrespecting young people when you make it seem like they can't hear certain concepts. That's kind of the thinking we had when we were like, we can't teach sex ed because if we teach them about pregnancy and where babies come from, they're going to want to have a baby.
Right.
No, it's the exact opposite, actually. So I think we need to teach kids about communism and socialism and capitalism and totalitarianism and feudalism and all of those kinds of things. And CRT is just another academic framework for looking at the law and race and power. That's all it is. Now, it doesn't mean you have to accept every part of it. And as a matter of fact, critical race theorists don't even agree on everything. You know what I mean? That's how you have these conferences. That's why we have discussions and debates and those sorts of things. But you can introduce kids to concepts and you're not necessarily brainwashing them the way the right tries to make it seem. Now, in terms of educational value, the most important value I think in education, beyond learning how to read and write and spell and basic math, is critical thinking, is problem solving, is thinking through issues. And that's what that's what African American studies does. And it is more than African American history. It's a mixture of sociology, anthropology, economics. It's very interdisciplinary, political science. These are all the kinds of things you're going to have in African American studies. We're just going to look at it, and look at it from a different framework than you will probably get, and get a little more depth than you're going to get in your American history or American studies course.
So looking at these topics, it always seems like they're being viewed through the lens of whiteness, how they feel, how they make white kids feel. And you pointed out in your piece that it sort of ignores the children of color in our communities and what their perspectives are. Can you talk a little bit about that and what role you think the government has to play in including everybody and representing everybody in all of these issues.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Florida is 15% Black. Um, you can't even talk about Florida history. You certainly can't talk about Tennessee history without talking about Black folks. You know what I mean? You can't talk about even freedom in this country without talking, and journalism. You being a journalist, you can't talk about journalism, and the work you do, whether you know it or not, is inspired by people like Ida B. Wells from your state. And the great work that she did informs the great work you do. And I think that young people have a right to learn those sorts of things. And I can tell you, for so long, there was an effort to miseducate children on race, to the point where, as I stated in the piece, there's 75 Confederate monuments in the state of Florida to this very day. That was part of a miseducation campaign that also went along with lost cause history, that was supposed to teach a completely perverted history of the Civil War and of the Confederacy and try to make it seem noble. And that's the vestiges of that still exist. He's not saying, hey, that was a way to miseducate people, we want to take that away. Let's start from scratch. No, he's keeping that. He's keeping the fact that you have 3 Confederate holidays. And I'm sure, I don't know if you have them in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
You definitely have 3 Confederate holidays in the state of Florida. As a matter of fact, in Alabama and Mississippi, you have King Lee Day. They couldn't even give Dr. King his own day.
Right.
Had to throw Robert E. Lee in there with him, who, by the way, wasn't from Mississippi or Alabama. He was from Virginia. But you get these kinds of ways to miseducate or draw false equivalencies, and students of color and children of color are left out. They don't see themselves reflected in the education, and that's damaging. If you don't see yourself, there's so much evidence, and you could even go to, there's evidence that all students benefit from having a Black teacher at some point in their childhood. There's literal evidence that says, not just Black students,
right,
but Black students especially, but all students, in terms of the attitudes that they develop about their neighbors and their society, benefit from having a Black teacher. Now, seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum will have the very same effect. But Ron DeSantis wants to take it out, or at least reframe it, so that all you get is the month of February, and you'll hear a little bit about Frederick Douglass, and you'll hear a little bit about Dr. King, and then they'll make it seem like racism ended, and they're going to talk about, even if they go into some depth about the institutional issues that we've had with race, they're going to say, well, there was redlining, and then we passed the law in 1968, and now that doesn't exist. But that will ignore the fact that just 2 weeks ago, the DOJ just recovered $31 million from City National Bank in LA for discriminating for basically racial redlining in Los Angeles. So, and that makes up $75 million that they've recovered since 2021. So these issues still exist. We have to, address them. And if young Black kids don't see themselves, and brown kids don't see themselves reflected in the curriculum, they're not going to understand their place in America and where they actually fit.
Absolutely. I think that's really well put. We have some legislators here in Tennessee. One is named William Lamberth, and the other is Senator Jack Johnson. They're both kind of the leaders of their, I guess, caucuses, minority or majority leaders in the Senate and the House. They're now carrying a bill to make Juneteenth a state holiday. 2 white dudes who also helped make it essentially illegal for teachers to talk about the truth behind the lasting impacts of slavery and, Juneteenth. So they feel like the cosmetic move to make it a state holiday as instead of recognition is somehow makes up for the fact that they're basically threatening teachers who talk about this stuff. And DeSantis really takes it to a whole other level. I mean, this guy, has been fighting these culture wars since the beginning. You wrote he's using the word woke, or that anyone really using the word woke, a term created by Black people to refer to systemic justice, and disregarding what Black people mean by it in order to ridicule it is anti-Black. And I think that's really well put. They've sort of hijacked that word woke, which was initially being used to talk about being aware of the injustices, and now they've turned it into some derogatory term. Can you talk a little bit about DeSantis's anti-woke crusade? Because that is the Stop Woke Act that he's using to essentially stop Black history. So, it kind of betrays them and the meaning of what they're actually talking about.
Right. I mean, it's irony at its finest that being woke, initially and still does in African American communities meant you are aware of injustices, overt and covert, and injustices, both overt and covert. And here he is trying to hide things even more, hide knowledge, hide concepts, saying, "Hey, you shouldn't learn about that." And it's really disappointing that we haven't, and I'm glad that the White House spoke out on it. I'm glad that other people are starting to understand how dangerous this is. And by the way, AP African American Studies is an elective. This is not even something that's required.
Right.
If you are somebody who is absolutely against Black history and culture and sociology and all these other things that are incorporated in an interdisciplinary African American studies course, you don't have to let your kid take the course. There are other, there are other courses. There's AP European history and culture. There's AP, I think, Italian history and culture. There's all kinds of courses you can take in Florida. Some students are going to have this available, and he's trying to take that from them unless they give them a perverted history and a perverted. I don't think he's trying to ban Black history. I think he's trying to pervert it, which is worse. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing, and this is what goes with banning books. It's one thing to say, hey, we're not going to provide you with this, but we're going to pervert it and make it something that it really isn't. To serve our purposes is worse. And we've seen this with Dr. King, the way they've destroyed Dr. King's legacy, and made him about something that he wasn't about. And make it so that, every kid knows two quotes, "I have a dream" and something about content of character. And then, all of the other things about his democratic socialism and about his, his radical beliefs and his anti-poverty beliefs and his anti-militarism. And all that goes out the window,
right?
Because they have been able to make Dr. King into the Walmart version of Dr. King, and that's really, really dangerous. And so I think even some of my right-wing colleagues, friends, I guess, I talk to them and I'm like, you should be outraged about this. All that, ranting you did about free speech, and you got happy when Elon Musk came on and now we're going to do free speech, but then you're with book banning and taking courses away and not giving students an option. I think is really hypocrisy at its finest.
Absolutely. Hypocrisy at its finest should be DeSantis's campaign slogan if he ever gets around to launching it. You mentioned the MLK quote, that men can be judged by the content of their skin, content of their character, not the color of their skin. You talked about color blindness, and we always hear from people who are against these courses basically saying, "Oh, we don't see color," right? and I think the point there, and I want to ask you how you feel when you hear that, but it seems like they're missing the point that it's not about not seeing color. Nobody's asking you to pretend we're all one person, we're all the same. It's about seeing each other's differences and loving each other for those differences, not in spite of those differences, for those differences. So when you say I don't see color, first of all, you're lying because you do. and it's just not honest. And then, we need to see the color, see our differences, and embrace those differences. So they seem to have completely missed the entire point of MLK's quote. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. I just to piggyback off of that, I hope your audience sees my beautiful chocolate skin. Like this is my, I'm
I
very
see it.
thank you. Thank you, Justin. I think it's, it's a beautiful thing that we, are a myriad of colors. It's the problem is not color recognition. It's the systemic denial of resources and opportunity. That's what, the fact that, I'm black or you're white or whatever, none of that is in really the issue. The issue is who is being denied opportunity, you know. And so colorblindness, the other interesting thing is there was a guy named Obasoji. I think I'm saying his name right. It's a Nigerian name. And I want to say he's at Stanford, somewhere on the West Coast. And he did a study on blind people and on their understandings of race. So if you believe in color blindness, right, you believe that that's possible, then people born blind, they would have no, racial discrimination or understandings of race, right? Because they've never seen it. They can't see your color. But what he found was they have the very same understandings about race, and it informed, who they spent time with, who they dated, who they chose as roommates, all those sorts of things. They had the very same understandings of race. So your color blindness, does not necessarily rid society of even individual, which I think is less important, but even individual discrimination is still there, even if you're born blind. So that should tell you something about how useless color blindness is. The issue isn't color recognition. It's, what communities, and by the way, there's always collateral damage in all of this. So, the idea that Black people are held out of certain, opportunities and advantages, there are always going to be white people who are held out of those same opportunities and advantages. This is why Dr. King, when, he went into sort of a dual struggle with race and class, he wanted to help those people in Eastern Tennessee who are in those trailer parks because they need help too. And this is, Reverend Barber, he's trying to do the poor people's movement.
Absolutely.
To keep that kind of legacy alive, which is all of, if you understand it, is all a vestige of white supremacy. You know what I mean? It's something that, deserves a lot of conversation. And, I always tell people, my students, that patriarchy hurts men. You know what I mean? Sexism hurts men too, believe it or not. And the same thing, white supremacy actually ends up hurting a lot of white people.
100%. Yeah, there's a book by, I think, Jonathan Metzl's book is called Dying of Whiteness. And, it's essentially, I mean, look, for example, expanding Medicaid in Tennessee, that the root of not expanding Medicaid in Tennessee is an animosity towards Obama playing politics with people's lives. And it's really mostly white people that didn't get that Medicaid expansion benefit. Yeah. Hundreds of thousands of Tennesseans. We've lost $24 billion. We're number one in medical bankruptcies, and people are dying constantly as a result of that, even if they don't make that connection. So, denying ourselves services because we are not binding together, with a class struggle like you're talking about, is really at the core of all of this. And these racial issues, these wedge issues, are used to keep, poor white people, low-income white people, low-income Black people from coming together. And that is what the Poor People's Campaign is all about. That's what MLK fought for. And, that's ultimately what Desantis, who is, a billionaire funded, multiple Ivy League school educated elitist pretending to be a populist, is trying to keep us from doing, using these wedge issues ultimately. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad that you say that. Like some of these guys who play like they're working class, like JD Vance and other people
Right.
who at this point in his life, he's been wealthy and elite far longer than he was ever working class. You know what I mean? I'm not saying he wasn't working class. He's legit. I'm not suggesting that he's not. But these guys oftentimes they are able to articulate these working class issues, but actually turn it against working class people,
That's
which
right.
is so frustrating. And I never understood Trump, who was someone who was, and I know we're getting a little off topic, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
never understood I talked to a lot of my friends and I would be like, how is it that you find Donald Trump as someone who represents your struggle as a
right.
working class white person when this guy is a Manhattan elitist? He
Right.
wouldn't be caught dead in Eastern Tennessee if it wasn't for some sort of rally or someone patting. It's not like he was going to come and go to a restaurant and sit there and shake hands with people and walk through a trailer park. He is a guy who poops in a gold toilet. And it's interesting that you mentioned the class struggle, because racism and white supremacy has always been used to create these kinds of hierarchies. And sometimes they're real, sometimes they're false. But in order to prevent real class struggle, so you have, the reason, the vast majority of white people never held people enslaved. The vast majority, about 74% of white folks never held someone enslaved, not even a single person. And of that, I think it was of that 26%, 2.7% held 50 people or more. So it's really, really small sliver of really elite people in the South who held people enslaved. But yet the narrative was, you don't want Black people to be free because then they're going to come for your job. And then we can go into the 20th century. Same thing. You had urban riots in 1917, 18, and 19. It was, you don't want Black people to have opportunities or join unions or anything because they're going to come for your job. And again, now a lot of times, even within Black communities, we hear, yeah, you want to be against immigration and
That's right.
asylum
That's right.
because they're going to come for your job. Instead of understanding the commonality. And with the enslaved, it's like that person already has your job and they're undercutting you because they're working for free. If anything, you should want them to be free. But this is the kind of narrative that was pushed by the elites on all of us. And these are the kinds of things that we talk about in African American studies. Is people think it's blame whitey. That's what they think, African American studies is just some Black dude in a suit who's got this elite education, who's going to sit there and tell all these young kids, tell white kids to hate themselves, and tell Black kids that they should hate their neighbor. And that's the exact opposite of what we're saying in those kinds of courses. First of all, we don't tell them what to think. We let them formulate their own ideas. And oftentimes what comes out of a lot of courses is them seeing commonality and understanding that certain people, understanding their own privileges in some cases, because at the college level, a lot of them are middle class or above, understanding their own privileges, and that's the Black kids and the white kids and everyone else. But also understanding, how race is oftentimes used to divide us in situations where we could come together.
Well, I wish you were my professor. I think this is important stuff. I think, kids need to hear it. Just as you mentioned Trump, I know everything always leads back to that guy for some reason, but I just want to kind of ask your opinion as like a final thing here. People seem to be presenting Desantis as like a step in the right direction from Trump. a step forward, a less crazy version. And I feel like in a lot of ways, he's actually more troubling, more dangerous. Trump is obviously the most corrupt president we've ever had, puts himself first, greedy, all of that. DeSantis has shown that he's kind of willing to do anything and hurt whoever to gain power and political points. What do you think about the comparison being made between DeSantis and Trump?
Well, I think DeSantis is equally dangerous because, number one, he is supremely ambitious. This isn't about public service. This is about, Ron DeSantis becoming the president. And I don't know if he's going. I'm really curious to see how this all kind of plays out, because of the fact that I don't know that DeSantis has the charisma to deal with Trump on a debate stage and campaigning. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I saw him debate Andrew Gillum, and I thought that he was smug, and even with Charlie Crist, he's smug and he's not charismatic. He's not particularly, witty or anything like that. So it'll be interesting to see how he actually can hold up with someone like Trump, who is an entertainer, for better or worse. I don't see any kind of difference between DeSantis and Trump. DeSantis is not about policy. He's about jumping onto culture war issues. And that's been his main thing, is let me find a culture war issue to get people riled up. And this is a legacy of Southern governors. And it's funny because my editor wanted to take that part out and I had to sneak it back in, that, these kind of political stunts that we saw DeSantis do with the migrant flights. Yeah. Not only is that reminiscent of the reverse freedom rides, that the white citizens councils in the South used to do, was, hey, we're going to send them to Hyannis, Massachusetts, where the wealthy people live, where the Kennedys are, and, frustrate them that way. But it's also reminiscent of a lot of the political stunts that we've seen Southern governors do during segregation. So, going back to Orville Faubus, when he had them prevent, the Little Rock Nine from going into Central High School, the whole thing was a political stunt, because he was going to face a tough reelection, and he needed the segregationist vote. So he pulled a stunt. Ross Barnett, when he went personally down to block James Meredith from entering Ole Miss, that was his political stunt, his political moment while the press is there. I'm going to stand there in front of the door of the registrar's office and you're not going to get in. I don't care what the president of the United States says. That was a political stunt. These are the kinds of things, and this is the legacy that we're dealing with when we're talking about Ron DeSantis. And I think that's really, really dangerous for a country that needs real legislators with real ideas that are going to make it better for real people. Ron DeSantis is about ambition and stunts, and that's not going to take us anywhere as a country.
Jason, thanks so much for joining us, man. Your last sentence here at the end, you said African-American studies does not tell students what to think. It allows them to come to their own conclusions. Perhaps that's what DeSantis fears. And then you said, he's been trying to tell us who he is. It's time we believe him. So I thought that was a powerful close. And people should follow you at Dr. Jason Nichols on Twitter. He's a lecturer in the African-American Studies Department at University of Maryland, College Park, and longtime editor-in-chief of Words, Beats, and Life, the global journal of hip-hop culture, which I'm assuming means you're a Tribe Called Quest fan, which that's my shit. So I'm glad to hear that. And
and I like Ball and G. So all you Tennessee people out there,
okay,
Ball and MJG.
A-Ball and MJG. Okay, yeah. All right, that's a throwback right there too. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you coming on here. Let's keep in touch and have you back sometime soon.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much.
All right. So that's Dr. Jason Nichols at Dr. Jason Nichols on Twitter. Follow him. He's a good follow. Read that article. I just shared it. Let me know if that came through. Definitely a really good read. I thought he really broke it down well, what this DeSantis ban is all about. And the reason that I felt like it was worth having on here is because, yes, he seemed fair and reasonable. I agree with you, Gapper. And also it's very relevant to Tennessee because We have similar bills here that have already passed. We're having a similar conversation here throughout the country. And, banning African American studies is just nobody's idea of freedom. It's nobody's idea of, a free exchange of ideas. It's oppression, it's overreach. And, this Republican Party fancies itself the small government, hands off party, but they are constantly doing things that are opposite of that fly in the face of that. I just want to go back to, I saw Gapper was talking about the judging people by the color of their skin, and it's very unfair that someone says they're not being genuine when they say it. You know, I would just offer that, like, people do say I don't see color. Like, I hear that. And you're not being genuine when you say that. Like, you do see color, and so that isn't a genuine thing. Now, you may say that they're not saying it literally, right? Like you say, they genuinely mean they're not judging you based on it. Okay. But we all say that we're not judging based on it, but the point is color is real. Race is real, and that's a reality for people who are black and brown and not white, and white people too, but it's a reality that they live with every day. So when we say I don't see color, in some ways we're saying I don't see your struggle, and therefore we can't teach it. We can't teach the truth about it because I don't see it. And so I'm not trying to like have a laugh about the idea that I don't see color is not literal. I'm trying to literally say that is an unfair thing to say to people because it takes us in the wrong direction. You do see color literally, and it's important to see it. It's important to embrace it in each other, and it's important to teach the truth about it so that we understand what each other's going through and we make sure we don't make the same mistakes. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm sorry if it didn't come across in our exchange there. I think it's the point that Jason was trying to make also. And when we talk and focus so much on that MLK quote about judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, they focus on that, they take it out of context, and they never want to talk about why he felt the need to say that and all of the systemic injustices that he was fighting against to bring us to that point. And now in Tennessee, we're in a place, and especially in Florida, where to tell the truth about that, to teach that, is banned essentially. And, even if they didn't mean to ban it entirely, they've put a chill on teachers to the point where they're going to be afraid to talk about that. And who suffers when we do that? It's our kids who don't hear the truth about what we've been through. And so that's what we need to stand up and fight against in a very real way. And I hope more and more people will continue to speak out about it. It's really important that we do it. And one person that I just want to loop back for some of you, I'm sure you've seen it if you follow us, but along these lines at Governor Lee's inauguration, Rep. Justin Jones brought the 1619 Project. And if you can see him over on the left there, he was reading it while Governor Lee was giving his inauguration. And the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, it talks about how slavery is at the root of our country's founding, and you can't really understand it until you understand that. And it kind of sets as our original year, the 1619, it basically puts slavery at the core of our story, which many people don't want to do and feel like is not something our kids need to hear, but our kids do need to hear that stuff. And so Justin doing that, I thought was really important, even though he caught flack, not only from Republicans, but also from Democrats for doing that. And I think we need more people causing that good trouble, not less. And I hope more people will stand up and take stands and dissent in those nonviolent, peaceful ways like Justin did. I very much appreciate that he did that. And just as a final thing here, let's watch him do it because I brought a clip. Here is Representative Justin Jones reading Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project behind Governor Lee during his inauguration.
May we together, each of us, each one of us, consider the other and how we may use our lives to multiply in theirs. That's what Tennesseans do and have been doing for generations. That's why we are America at its best. And that is why Tennessee is leading the nation.
And it's a nice sentiment from Governor Lee there, except he doesn't live those words. He doesn't govern with those words. He disregards so many of the perspectives in our state, and we are not actually leading the nation in any real way. As anybody who's been paying attention knows, we are at the bottom in so many important categories like education outcomes, childhood obesity, poverty, crime, maternal and infant mortality, low-wage jobs, childcare deserts, education investment, voter disenfranchisement. So, an inauguration speech does not reality make, Governor Lee. And it's important that we keep standing up and yelling the truth about what's happening here in our state. Thank you for joining us. Follow Dr. Jason Nichols. Follow us at the TN Holler, and we'll see you next time.